line up all the dominoes that depend on that one claim and then just watch them fall.
Do you guys see that?
Yep, we do.
Yeah, we see one of the best, beautiful human beings that walk on this earth.
Well,
I love how he looks like he's kind of smiling.
Yeah,
Didn't
look
he
at
belong
that.
to some organization?
He's trying not to
Didn't he
laugh.
belong to some secret society, Iru?
Yeah, not the haircut. It's one of my dreams.
What
You
secret
can't-
society is?
Copernicus.
Yeah.
It's from Nicolaitas, which is an order held by the Jesuit.
I still love the
Shit,
deathbed confession, the deathbed book, where you're just about to die and you pull out from underneath that hospital bed that book that you've written for something like, been waiting for this day so I can hand off this book.
all right.
Yeah,
And it wasn't even banned for like 200 years until after he wrote it either. Maybe it's 100 years, 100 to 200, 300 years. So it's so stupid. It's not like he was afraid. People did not get killed for writing books then. Okay. People, they want to tell you that. They'll tell you Giordano Bruno was burned at a stake for saying that there was other star systems or something, or other stars were other suns. But that's a good story.
yeah, it's a good story. But I see a full university lecture from Spain talking about Giordano Bruno, and supposedly the guy was burned not by his scientific observation, but because he started promoting the Hermetic philosophy.
Yes, I heard that too. Is Austin here?
Yeah, still here, us.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yep,
Yeah,
we
we
do.
do.
Hermetic philosophy.
All right. So you guys ready?
Yep.
Ready.
We're
I can
ready.
see it.
Jaron will change your buttons for you.
No, I will not. He's sharing his screen. You do it. I don't have the capability.
Oh, okay. That's right. God, boy, we got things rigged up here or what?
You
Holy
scared me. I'm
cow.
like, what? Okay, go ahead.
All right, cool. So I'm just going to leave it like this instead of going full screen presentation, but good enough. So, all right, so I called it Religion Disguised as Science. So we have, of course, heliocentrism has never been proven. It is a religion. And of course, the modern world teaches it as if it is definitive fact. And we were all taught that from like 5 years old up. But you will be surprised to find out throughout these quotes that, in fact, that is not the case. So, kind of summary of the entire idea here. I can construct for you a spherically symmetrical universe with Earth at its center, and you cannot disprove it based on observations. You can only exclude it on philosophical grounds. In my view, there's absolutely nothing wrong in that. What I want to bring out in the open is the fact that we are using philosophical criteria in choosing our models. A lot of cosmology tries to hide that. That's infamous physicist George F.R. Ellis. And so that is, in fact, what all this boils down to. So to just make sure everyone understands, it's called the Copernican principle, which is the idea that the Earth is insignificant. It does not occupy a special or unique position in the universe, and it's merely insignificant. And due to immense odds, eventually, of course, it would happen. So that's the philosophy that they hold to, because the other option, of course, is that the Earth is special and does occupy a unique position, and thus it would have to be created.
And let me just say that, because I think this is one of the quotes that got me big time. And I like George Ellis. If you never listened to George Ellis, he's a mainstream physicist. I mean, he believes mostly mainstream, but he's also a little bit religious or spiritual. And he's the most level-headed of all the physicists, astrophysicists. When you listen to him speak, he always tries to bring it back. I think he's still pro geocentrism. He can't say that, but he tries to push this idea that and he's anti multiverse, anti bubble universe. Anything that can't be proven, he says, is just science going in the wrong direction, and we're letting them fall apart. But anyway, back to what he said here. This is the same thing, branching off of Edwin Hubble's thing, that the observations say we are the center, or could be the center. Let's just leave it at that. It doesn't say for sure, because there could be something else that it says. But because they didn't want that, based on philosophical grounds, they changed it and said, well, what are the other possibilities? And that's when somebody came up with this idea of the raisin bread, right? If you bake raisin bread, all the raisins get further away from each other. Or if you put a bunch of dots on a balloon and blow the balloon up, all the dots get further away from each other. So that idea, just that mental idea, There's no evidence of that. It's just, okay, this is what we want. And so we'll say that that's what's happening. And then they do all their science from there. So when you talk about scientists have no bias, it's the entirety of science is based on a bias. The entirety of everything tests that they do, every experiment they do is with the implied bias that philosophically we cannot be the center. So that's not, I mean, go back and listen to Feynman, go back and listen to these people that at least seem to make some sense when they talk science. If a observation doesn't meet experiment, throw it away. Of course, they never would do that with gravity because that's everything. They need it. And then this one here is insane to me that we've never went back and looked and seen if that was a correct choice. And when you just look at the words of Hubble, obviously they were deathly afraid to say the absolute horror and it must be avoided at all costs. So when you hear at all costs, and then you hear these guys making fun of Bob and saying, Bob, then you said, how are we going to hide this? So what Bob didn't say is we must avoid this at all costs. And even if he did, you're talking about two different things. When you're trying to debunk what is the current going model versus when you're trying to establish a model, right? There's two very different things to me there. I'll give more leeway to the people trying to debunk the current model than I would for somebody saying, okay, well, here's our observations and let's come up with something. So that's not what was being done here. And pretty insane that to just avoid it and never talk about it again. And then when these experiments like Michselson-Morely and all, Sanyuk and Gale, all these experiments come along, Aries failure. Why is it then that they continue to show that the other one was correct? The other the observation that we are the center. They talk about Occam's razor. Let's think what Occam's razor would tell us. What it makes more sense. We look around, we see everything moving away from us. We're the center. Or we look around, everything's moving away from us. So therefore, we're on a gigantic, ever expanding with red-shifting galaxies and everything. I mean, it's just insane that people have accepted this fact that this is science. It's not science.
That is because God likes to play with us. So he put everything upside down for you to entertain.
Thank you, God.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Austin. I won't interrupt you.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Okay, hey,
So,
can I say something really quick to Austin before you go? You go on? Sorry. I wanted to say this also when we were, addressing the commenter. But the other thing is that they have concluded conclusively through experiment is that nobody has ever proven motion. Nobody has ever found any curvature. And the third biggie, which has been reiterated as recently as in the last few years, is Max Tegron, who is a physicist, astrophysicist with MIT. They sent up on one of the satellites supposedly, and they scanned for cosmic microwave background. And guess what? Upon multiple iterations of that, they proved conclusively and without a doubt that the Earth is at the center of the universe according to the microwave background, and they even called it the axis of evil because they didn't know what else to say about it. So again, Earth has been proven at the center of the universe. Earth has been proven to be motionless, and Earth has been proven to have no curvature. And I'm not just saying idle proofs. I'm saying there are hundreds of incidences of this. Okay, now I'm done.
all right, cool. So I did have a little depiction. I don't know where it went in all this chaos, but I had an illustration of Michselson-Morely. So we're going to kind of start there. That's where this all really came to the forefront. And the Earth was pretty much proven to be stationary. So anyway, it's interferometry. You shoot lasers and light in different directions. Michselson, however you say it, he had been working on interferometry for 4 decades. And he had come up with the most delicate, most precise measuring apparatus at the time known to man. And we still utilize interferometry for the most precise measurements that we can have. And of course, they say that the Earth was revolving 20 miles per second around the sun, and this could detect as small as 2 miles per second. And anyway, so the idea being if you shoot light with the movement of the Earth or against the movement of the Earth, the light is going to travel at different rates. It's going to take longer, of course, if it goes against the movement. And it did not show the difference that was needed, basically. That's a brief summary. So anyway, here is Einstein when he's talking about why he came up with special relativity. He's given a speech, and he says, I have come to believe that the motion of the Earth cannot be detected by any optical experiment, and that is, of course, the infamous Albert Einstein. He's talking about, optical experiments with light, specifically in context, and that will be what the Glober's response is. He's just talking about light, blah, 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 which means they'd have to throw ring laser gyros out because that uses light. But anyway, one quote that seems to often be overlooked by Einstein, this is actually in his book he wrote about special and general theory of relativity. He said, to the question whether or not the motion of the Earth in space can be made perceptible in terrestrial experiments, we have already remarked that all attempts of this nature led to a negative result. Before the theory of relativity was put forward, it was difficult to become reconciled to this negative result. So that is Einstein telling you no experiment on the Earth can prove the motion of the Earth. Now, I test these out on anti-flat earthers. What they'll say is, oh, he's just talking about the revolution. But of course, no, it's either the Earth's at rest or it's not. And if it's not, that means it has to be rotating and revolving. It's not either or. And it can't be at rest while it's rotating, of course. So I think that flat earthers should use this quote much more than the other one, because in the context of the other one, he is talking about an optical experiment using light. And Michselson-Morely here is point blank any terrestrial experiment. So I think that's very interesting. I'm going to try to kind of breeze through these. I have a lot of quotes. This is again in context of the Michselson-Morely. This is Albert Michelson himself. This conclusion directly contradicts the explanation, which presupposes that the Earth moves. You'll hear that the talking point of anti-flat earthers is it disproved the ether. No, it showed that the Earth wasn't moving. And since they were philosophically devoted to the Copernican principle, and they would have to admit that 500 years of mainstream science have been wrong, instead they didn't even entertain that possibility, but instead desperately came up with pseudoscience to explain the opposite, which is the opposite of science. Here is Henry Poincaré. This is actually a guy that Einstein sold a ton of his stuff for relativity from. This guy was a genius. He said a great deal of research has been carried out concerning the influence of the Earth's movement. The results were always negative. Okay, moving on. Same guy.
Hey, Austin.
Sorry, go ahead.
Hang on, just a second. I want to throw in there also that when they're talking about Einstein, first they came out with the Lenard's contraction. Which contraction is it called? I always forget this.
Lorentz
contraction.
Lawrence Fitzgerald, yeah.
I have a friend, his last name is Lenard, so I keep calling it the Lenard's contraction. Anyway, so when basically the first explanation that they came out with when they were trying to explain why these laser interferometry experiments did not pick up any motion of the Earth was, when they did that, the first explanation they had was they said, well, the apparatus, when we stuck it in the ether stream, it basically shortened it, right? They had no proof of that whatsoever. It was a complete desperation move. And they said that because it shortened that apparatus, which of course then obviously a laser interferometer would have picked up that information, they said, so we couldn't measure any forward velocity. Well, one of the problems that we have today that's a big problem for science is that very same technology, which is inside of ring laser gyros and fiber optic gyros, which was the tool that I was using to pick up that drift, and I do say drift, it proved without a doubt that the ether existed, because under relativity, you cannot get a change in velocity as you move these two different directions. Well, we have working technology based on the ether actually functioning, ring laser and fiber optic gyros. So that is absolutely undeniable. And beyond that, another thing that proved it was the ether moving and not the Earth was the Airy's failure experiment, which basically, all you had to do is just do a little optical wizardry with a telescope in changing angles. You guys have all seen the experiment before, and it proved unequivocally that it is not the Earth that is moving. It's the sky that's moving above us. And it goes on and on and on. And like I said, dozens, tens of dozens, hundreds, there are so many people that have done this. And what they've done is they've completely written it out of the curriculum. They don't even talk about it, because every single one of those things is a death blow to Einstein and his nonsense relativity theory. Continue.
Exactly. And just for anyone that doesn't know, like a simple way to put the Michselson-Morely, they thought that the Earth was spinning and revolving, so they shot the lights 2 different ways. And so one of the light, the like path of the light was longer, and thus would have taken longer, right? So it was a greater distance, so it would have taken longer for the light to get there, but it didn't show that. So that's why Einstein said that space itself that the apparatus itself was contracting, and that time physically expanded and slowed down so that it looked like it took the same time and traveled the same distance.
Yeah,
Okay,
we've all
like
seen
you
time
said,
expand, right?
Oh yeah.
It's the craziest thing ever. They're like, oh, Einstein's just some profound genius that came up with this metaphysical idea of space and time. No. He had to say that because it was necessitated by the observation, right? He had to say, oh, well, time slowed down, so that means it got bigger, and then the apparatus got smaller because it's in motion. So it looked as if the universe was tricking us to make it look like it was at rest. That's what relativity is.
And it causes paradoxes because, again, somebody talked about a garage that fits a ladder just perfectly and both doors can close. Let's say both doors can open to the garage, on both sides. And then you theoretically move that ladder at some high speed through the garage. And if you could close the doors at a specific time, but they say that the length contracts, right? That it, so maybe it doesn't fit and then you close and then it does fit, but it's a paradox. It's like the, what do they call it? Schrodinger's cat, or it's just dumb because it really can't exist that way. We know that things do not contract. They do not move a certain speed and then they get smaller. But
exactly. The idea is that everything in motion is shrinking. That's what relativity says.
And I was just reading this quote by Einstein here that says, according to the general theory of relativity, space without ether is unthinkable. For in such space, there not only would be no propagation of light, but also no possibility of existence for the standards of space and time, measuring rods and clocks, nor therefore any space-time intervals in the physical sense. So just interesting that he's also understood that ether has to exist.
Right.
I love how they, at this time, just ignore all of the matter that's in between us and the stars. And so all of a sudden now, let's just ignore all of the different, the solar wind out there, not just produced by the sun, but each of the millions of billions of stars that are out there. Each one of those little suns should also be producing this solar wind. And yet we're just going to pretend like none of that exists. And by the way, we're going to claim that all these stars are made out of gas, but there's no gas in between us and those stars. And so it's this perfect straight line between us and the stars with no interference, except for the Earth's gravity. That's their whole claim right there. And yeah. And so because of that, because of this lengthening of light, that's all of the lost my words. Sorry.
Is there such thing as a gas moon? And my question is, why not? Why would there only be moons made of rocks around gas planets? Why not gas moons around rock planets?
That is a great question. That's a great question.
Because it wouldn't fit the model. That's why they would have to explain another bizarre phenomenon that would cause that to happen.
But what is already the phenomenon that would ever allow for a gas planet to start to form?
Well, there isn't because theoretically they form out of nebula, right?
The space.
Yeah, it's absurd. Everything about the heliocentric model and the way they describe it is absurd. And there is zero proof, zero demonstrable, lab proof. Nothing has ever been experimentally proven. They just tell a story and everybody has to believe it. It's absurd.
Redshift. Redshift was the word I forgot.
So the weird, now I'm quoting Jenny from TikTok. It's according to Jenny she made a great TikTok where she's talking about Harry Potter and the globe Earth. First, she's like, what the hell are you talking about? And then she's like, well, Harry Potter has facts about it. What his parents' names are, what his age is, where he went to school. And you're like, yeah, those are facts, but the Harry Potter is not real. Well, the same thing is true in space. There's tons of facts. How many moons does Jupiter have? How fast does it go in orbit? Those are facts that just doesn't exist. Not like they tell us. So I think that they at one point realized they couldn't get to space, and they made they're like, oh, well, if nobody can go there, if we can't leave the Earth, then if we pretend that we do, then nobody can ever disprove it. And we can say basically anything we want about it, because who can disprove that? And that's the place that we're in now. No matter how hard we try and fight against this, there is no disproving of something that you can't really go and verify. It's just our word against theirs, and they've got they spent 200 years teaching it to everybody.
Yeah, we at least have common sense and logic and also experimental basis. They got nothing.
They have Neil deGrasse.
Well, there's that. And Brian Cox.
Oh boy, old Brian Cox. That guy says some of the
Who
biggest.
Brian Cox also says that there is no way to prove that the Earth is moving. By the way, so.
Yeah.
Well, he also nobody in human history has ever believed that the Earth was flat too. So he's definitely got his finger on the pulse of the world.
Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
just want to make the macro point here, right? Okay. So the point is that we have in 2022 we have a paradigm where we have people we call anti-flat earthers. They run around and they've created an entire different model
Yes.
to try to combat the flat Earth evidence. Okay, but this is using a hostile witness. They appeal to the idea that we deny science. No, you think all these scientists are wrong and lying and blah blah blah. No. We think they're telling the truth right here. So here we're going to use them, and they're effectively turning into heliocentric heretics. Okay, so I think that this is the most efficient way to really break through the cognition of someone that's honest, because this is what the actual model is. We don't really need to capitulate to the nonsense of the 2022 anti-flat Earth movement where they just make up stuff on a whim, ad hoc, desperately trying to combat the evidence, right? We need to, in order to have a belief that's justified, you have to understand your belief. And so I just happen to know that almost no one does actually understand the history of this religion. And so I think that's kind of where we're being tricked, where we're going back and forth with these anonymous keyboard warrior Dan Lamels making stories up. And the truth is we can just invoke their very priesthood to show what's wrong with it, right?
Yep. Well said.
All right, we'll move on. So
Okay.
Henry Poincaré, again, is one of the main guys that Einstein stole a lot of his stuff from. He said, we do not have and cannot have any means of discovering whether or not we are carried along in a uniform motion of translation. Physicist Henry Poincaré. Okay, here's another very infamous physicist, Wolfgang Pauli. The failure of the many attempts to measure terrestrially any effects of the Earth's motion. Not to get too iterative, these are just numerous physicists acknowledging that you can't prove the Earth is moving, although in 2022 they will tell you that Foucault's pendulum from 1851 proves that the Earth is moving. Here's Arthur Eddington, who that's the infamous Eddington experiment where they claim they predicted, which it was actually post-diction, where they saw a star behind the eclipse, and that proves relativity, which all it shows is, even in theory, that the light bent around, and that doesn't prove in any way that relativity is correct. But anyway, very infamous heliocentric priest here. He said, in context of Michselson-Morely, there was just one alternative. The Earth's true velocity through space might happen to have been nil. And that was, again, physicist Arthur Eddington. So when you hear someone try to tell you that there's 100% proof and all this nonsense and that Michselson-Morely had nothing to do with the Earth being stationary, they don't know what they're talking about. They're just wrong. Now, here's the guy that Bob was talking about. He said, briefly, everything occurs as if the Earth were at rest. That's physicist Henrik Lorentz. Again, Lorentz actually proposed an idea to explain Michselson-Morely to keep the Copernican principle and the heliocentric model alive. And he suggested that the measuring apparatus itself contracted. He said that it was because the ether physically contracted it. So he offered a mechanism for contraction, which was that the ether physically contracted it. Of course, Einstein took the Lorentz contraction, made the Lorentz-Fitzgerald contraction, which is a transform equation, which is still used in every single branch of quote-unquote physics to this day to make everything relative. And he just did away with the ether, though. So he said that basically there's no explanation. It just contracts because it's in motion. He actually didn't offer a physical mechanism, but he stole the math from Lorentz. So that's pretty interesting. So then here is Isaac Newton himself. In order for the Earth to be at rest in the center of the system of the sun, planets, and comets, there's required both universal gravity and another force in addition that acts on all bodies equally according to the quantity of matter in each of them and is equal and opposite to the accelerative gravity with which the Earth tends to the sun, and thus celestial bodies can move around the Earth at rest, as in the Tychonic system. Now, of course, we are not going to believe in his reification of gravity and all this nonsense. The point is that Isaac Newton himself said that the Earth could, in fact, be at rest. He actually said that gravity was proof of God for all those atheists that love him. He also, of course, said that, the idea that gravity would act on brute matter through the vastness of a vacuum is to me so great absurdity that no man with competent faculty of thinking in philosophical matters could ever fall into it. So he didn't offer a mechanism, but anyway, I think that's pretty interesting. Moving on, just because I have a lot here. It is both amusing and instructive to speculate on what might have happened if such an experiment could have been performed in the 16th or 17th centuries, when men were debating the rival merits of the Copernican and Ptolemaic systems. The result would surely have been interpreted as conclusive evidence for the immobility of the Earth, and therefore as a triumphant vindication of the Ptolemaic system and irrefutable falsification of the Copernican hypothesis. Physicist G.J. Whitrow, which again is in the context of Michselson-Morely, that shows clearly the most viable empirical explanation for the observation is simply that the Earth is at rest. I do have these kind of jumbled up. I wasn't able to get them all exactly right, so it's going to be kind of all over the place. But
that's okay, because we're kind of cutting in between you on this stuff anyway, Austin. So it's no big deal. But yeah, you're doing a great job so far. It's just, you stay right on it.
Cool. So one of the most surprising findings is that the fluctuations in the cosmic microwave radiation temperatures at large angular scales do not match those predicted by the standard Big Bang model. This is the European Space Agency, the Planck probe 2013. You don't know, they got measurements of the cosmic microwave background to show that the Earth is at the center, and we have universal dispersal of energy out from the Earth in the center. And it actually formulates this axis central to the Earth. And like Bob said, they called it the axis of evil. Oh, that sounds like science. They called it evil because it goes against the idea that the Earth isn't special, which means there's a creator and maybe they need to stop living so immoral. But anyway, so this is, they were basically saying, well, we think that's probably a fluke and they must have made a mistake in their recordings. We're going to wait for the Planck probe data. And then, of course, it showed even more conclusively that the Earth is at the center, and it is directly contradictory to the Big Bang model. This is the European Space Agency. I think it's just important to point this out. People that believe in this are going to have to go against the very top levels.
That's right. And remember, it was one of MIT's, Massachusetts Institute of Technology's, biggest astrophysicists that brainstormed all this. Max Tegmark or something like that, and he was elated. He doesn't know what to think about it, other than it shows time and time and time again that everything about this Earth is stationary and at the center of the universe.
Correct. It's hilarious. And he did come up with a pretty ingenious way to decipher the data. So next quote we have is, looking into this anomaly more deeply, of course, talking about the cosmic microwave background, we will find that it remains robust throughout all 7 years of published WMAP data, and furthermore, that it is very difficult to explain within the context of the canonical inflationary lambda cold dark matter of cosmology, or the Big Bang. The observations disagree markedly with the predictions of the theory. This is a paper written by numerous astrophysicists. We got Glenn Starkman, Craig Copey, Dragan Huderer, and Dominique Schwarz. So again, there is no answer for this to this day. It's just directly contradictory to their belief system. And instead of acknowledging what the evidence shows, they will just go down swinging philosophically. Here's another quote. The apparent alignment in the cosmic microwave background in one of the particular directions throughout space is called evil because it undermines our ideas about the standard cosmological model. The Copernican principle seems to be in jeopardy. Astrophysicist Ashok Singhal. So just point blank there, the Copernican principle, again, is the idea that the Earth is not special or significant. Okay, so this is another quote in regards to the cosmic microwave background. Why is the solar system cosmically aligned? Astrophysicist Dragan Huderer. Of course, that should not be the case. It should be all random. It should have no preference to the Earth whatsoever. But that's not what the data shows. So another quote we have here, no longer could astronomers hope that the Copernican dilemma would disappear with improved data. The data were in hand and their implication inescapable. We were at the center of a spherically symmetric distribution of gamma ray burst sources, and this distribution has an outer edge. Astrophysicist Jonathan Katz. This is, of course, assuming omnidirectionality, assuming a globe. But the fundamental part that we're addressing here is the motion of the Earth. Of course, the Earth can't really be a globe without spinning and revolving, but that's not the point. They're assuming the Earth's a sphere, and they're looking at the data, and so they're laying it out symmetrical to that. But the point is that it shows that the Earth is not ever expanding infinite. It has an outer edge, and it's completely central to the Earth. And these are very infamous top-level physicists. This guy, of course, won a Nobel Prize, physicist Lawrence Krauss. But when you look at the CMB map, and this guy is a very, very cold-hardened atheist, big time, yeah. When you look at the CMB map, you also see that the structure that is observed is, in fact, in a weird way, correlated with the plane of the Earth around the sun. Is this Copernicus coming back to haunt us? That's crazy. We're looking out at the whole universe. That would say we are truly the center of the universe. Physicist Lawrence Krauss. Uh-oh. All right, now we all know this little goober. So all this evidence that the universe looks the same, whichever direction we look, might seem to suggest there is something special about our place in the universe. In particular, it might seem that if we observe all other galaxies to be moving away from us, then we must be at the center of the universe. There is, however, an alternative explanation. The universe might look the same in every direction as seen from any other galaxy too. Yeah, this is, as we have seen, was Friedman's second assumption. We have no scientific evidence for or against this assumption. We believe it only on grounds of modesty or philosophy. It would be most remarkable if the universe looked the same in every direction around us, but not around other points in the universe. Physicist Stephen Hawking, saying that everything looks as if there's central distribution to the Earth, but we don't like that because that would go against the Copernican principle. So we don't have any scientific evidence for this, but we're just going to say it must just look like it's every place in the universe must look like the center from that location. Effectively, that's the ad hoc. They had to come up with that idea, and to this day, that's still like the top idea to explain it away.
Exactly, Austin. And so, ballers, take note. Every single mainstream physicist that we have pulled up here is saying the same thing. They're they're telling you that it is motionless, that we're at the center of the universe. They may not be saying it's flat, but there's definitely inferences towards it. So pay attention. We're using your mainstream modern day physicists who are just in denial. You guys sit there and blame me because I sit there and go, well, I'm having a hard time accepting the rotation of the ether, as Earth rotation. And look at these guys. They're just saying, no, we can't use that because that goes against our model, right? They are way more guilty of it than I am.
Yeah, because if they
I think that
they lied in getting there, right? If they lied in getting to the current model, then by Bob saying, yeah, we found this 15 degrees an hour and we need to check other things and that's because he's having to combat a lie, right? These guys weren't trying to combat a lie. They just did that just because they wanted it to be their way. Bob doesn't want it to be his way. He doesn't think that the current model is correct. So he was trying to find a way to say that it isn't, or based on the data. So Austin, I was just thinking we should do a second video. My other quotes video did really well. If me and you went through this whole thing, be a good video. People would like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm down for sure.
Now, this is all really significant common ground. They do the work for us.
Yeah.
It's the kryptonite to the conversation, bro. It's like the cheat code, in my opinion.
Yep.
Yeah.
What can you say back?
Describing things. That's a great way to describe things.
Yeah, I love being able to use their own physicist against them. Their own experiments, their own physicists, the words of these people that they idolize. They're coming right out and telling you in these quotes, guys. And if you think these quotes are illegitimate, go research them yourself. But the reality is everything we're showing you here is absolutely accurate, and everybody knows.
They'll say this is taken out of context. That's what they say all the time. Oh, this is just a quote. It's taken out of context.
Yeah.
Hey, Austin, can you go back real quick to the Ellis one? I just want to know. I forgot if you included the very last thing he says, which is, I mean, the biggest thing you could ever hear is a lot of cosmology tries to hide that. Here's a cosmologist, physicist, scientist who's telling you that the science itself is trying to hide something. If that doesn't destroy your whole belief in, think of all these guys, Simon Dan, and all these guys that love everything science puts out. And right here, he's telling you that something about that science is trying to hide something from you. They don't care. They keep they keep loving the science.
Yeah. Yeah,
Doesn't
for
that
sure.
remind you of
It's
the
like
guy? It's all
Again?
the programming is right there, and we're kind of pointing it out, but we're hiding it all. Yeah.
All right. We can keep going. I got so many minutes. So here's Michselson-Morely found shifts in the interference fringes, but they were very much smaller than the size of the effect expected from the known orbital motion of the Earth. Now, of course, known should be in quotations, but this is a very important quote because what you will hear from the modern day anti-flat Earth movement is that they detected nothing. It was a null result, and they dismiss it to instrumental error or user error. But no, they did indeed detect a pattern, interference fringes, right? And in fact, it was done over a dozen times within the next 20 years or so. And it was even replicated in 1987 by the Air Force. Every single time it shows very similar results. You always find a difference. While if, in fact, relativity was true, it should be exactly the same. It is not, and it shows some type of drift. Now, actually, there are some people who have done Michselson-Morely on a vertical axis as opposed to a horizontal axis. Of course, the ether has a vortex drift, and so like a hurricane or a tornado, the higher you go up, it's going to be different because, of course, it has a different dispersion of movement, right? So anyway, long story short, they did find something, and the modern day anti-flat earth script says they found nothing, but they don't understand any of it. They don't understand what's going on. So we have to teach them what's going on.
I can explain it 100%. I will tell you why they found that. They were saying that it was between 1 and 6 kilometers per second, and it would vary. Why is that? Well, because the Michselson-Morely apparatus was designed to register linear speed. In other words, going in a straight line, because they figured you would be going so far around the orbit of the sun that they needed to set it up in that configuration. But the ether, which is what it's really detecting, is in a vortexual pattern. Therefore, the ether was basically cutting across the two 90-degree arms of the apparatus, which, by the way, is exactly like LIGO. And as it did that, it was jumping up between 1 and 6 kilometers per second. And that is exactly where that came from. If they would have used a different orientation on that laser interferometer, it would have actually showed 0. But, like I said, they were looking for it in a specific configuration, and they were detecting one thing that wasn't what they were looking for. So there you have it.
Could we not say, is it not possible to, just think of this thought, that the ether is moving down in a toroidal fashion at 9.8 meters per second squared?
Absolutely. Absolutely, we can do that. And remember, as we have demonstrated with the Gaussian surfaces, when you have a positive voltage, which would be attributed to the firmament, and negative earth ground, it naturally causes a downward current flow. And that absolutely is that pressure. Remember what Ken Wheeler said, it's all about pressure mediation. And he's right, it is. And so that's what's keeping that. We're being pushed down very gently. Everything is being pushed down. So, yes.
So remind me here, the Michselson-Morely experiment, that's the thing where they hung the bar down with the weights on the end of it? And
No. That's Cavendish.
No.
Oh,
you shoot interferometry, but you shoot light in different ways. And if the Earth is revolving, that means one of the light paths is going against the movement of the Earth. So it should take longer to get to the receiver, but it didn't. Right, so it should have it didn't even measure like 1/6 of what was supposed to be there. So it's just like showing light's supposed to be moving relative to the motion of the Earth, but it wasn't. Okay, so what happened when the experiment was done in 1887? That's Michselson-Morely. There was never in any orientation at any time of the year any shift in the interference pattern. Now that is, there was an interference pattern, but there was never any shift. And of course, if the Earth is orbiting an elliptical orbit, certainly at the certain times where you change direction in the orbit, you would have a differential in the interference pattern. But it did not change relative to the time of year as it should. Anyway, no shift, no fringe shift, nothing. What's the implication? Here was an experiment that was done to measure the speed of the Earth's motion through the ether. This was an experiment that was done 10 times more sensitive than it needed to be. It could have detected speeds as low as 2 miles a second instead of the known 20 miles per second. That's a typo. That the Earth, as in its orbital motion around the sun, it didn't detect it. What's the conclusion from the Michselson-Morely experiment? The implication is that the Earth is not moving. Physicist Richard Wolfson.
That's right.
Is point blank.
And then one thing I want to add to that, since everybody seems to think that, it disproved the ether and all of that stuff. Well, the United States Air Force in 1985, in the 80s, actually redid the Michselson-Morely experiment. And guess what? They concluded that the ether was there. That they don't know what happened, supposedly, but it was their conclusion. This is written up in Nature magazine. I've presented it before on Globebusters. But as late as 85, the United States Air Force redid that experiment and proved it to be valid.
Correct. And of course, we can also go into 1925 to the Michelson-Gale, which show within a 98% accuracy consistently the sidereal rotation, meaning every day there's a rotation that happens between the Earth and the sky. But of course, it's the sky moving. And they couldn't invoke that as proof of the Earth rotation because it didn't show the revolution. So they just basically brushed it under the rug.
Right. Well, they couldn't.
Because it shows that the sky moves.
Yeah, they couldn't, because then they'd have to explain a different explanation for Michselson-Morely. I mean, Michelson-Gale, what they picked up is exactly what we picked up with the laser interferometer. A circular, spiraling, 15 degree per hour rotation. But it was not the Earth. And like I said, Airy's failure proves it. And the fact that we have devices that use the Sagnac effect effectively today in all the airliners, ring laser and fiber optic gyros, yada, yada, yada. It's just been proven over and over and over again.
All right.
All right.
Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, cool. All right, so here is another quote. We know that the difference between a heliocentric and a geocentric theory is one of motions only, and that such a difference has no physical significance. The Ptolemaic and Copernican views, when improved by adding terms involving the square and higher powers of the eccentricities of the planetary orbits, are physically equivalent to one another. Astronomer Fred Hoyle, who did coin the term Big Bang, he actually coined it that because he thought it was stupid, though. He was, of course, making fun of it, but he did coin the infamous term Big Bang. He was a legendary astronomer, probably never going to find anyone as real as this guy again that ever makes it to the mainstream. Here's another quote from him. Tycho Brahe proposed a dualistic scheme with the sun going around the Earth, but with all other planets going around the sun. And in making this proposal, he thought he was offering something radically different from Copernicus. And in rejecting Tycho's scheme, Kepler obviously thought so too. Yet in principle, there is no difference. Just once again, there is no difference in a geocentric and heliocentric Earth model mathematically, because that's what relativity does. It says that they are the same. There is no planetary observation by which we on Earth can prove that the Earth is moving in an orbit around the sun. Thus, all Galileo's discoveries with the telescope can be accommodated to the system invented by Tycho Brahe just before Galileo began his observations of the heavens. In this Tychonic system, the planets move in orbits around the sun, while the sun moves in an orbit around the Earth in a year. Furthermore, the daily rotation of the heavens is communicated to the sun and planets so that the Earth itself neither rotates nor revolves in an orbit. Physicist Bernard Cohen.
Right. So hold it right there, Austin. So just to let you guys know, when they say there is no planetary observation or whatever that we on Earth can prove that the Earth is moving in an orbit, that's not true. The Michselson-Morely and the laser interferometers, modern day, and even accelerometers, all of them would be able to detect that motion easily. The problem is the Earth isn't moving. That's why. And that's one of the things we covered also the other night on Globusters Tech, was we were talking about gyroscopes, right? And they were trying to figure out why they couldn't harvest power from gyroscopes, because somebody did the calculation of how much energy is being expended by the Earth as it rotates. And so theoretically, if you had a big old gyroscope and you spun it up and you attached some sort of generator to that thing, you could get the rotation of the Earth to simply power the generator. The Russians breadboarded it. They modeled it. Lots of people think it's a valid theory, and it is. But the problem is the Earth doesn't rotate. Therefore, it didn't work, and it doesn't. And so they're all confused, and they don't understand that. So anyway, continue. I'm sorry.
Correct. Exactly. Just reification of their belief. Some of these are kind of long, so I'm going to read them kind of fast. Sorry. But before Copernicus, people thought that the Earth stood still and that the heavens revolved about it once a day. Copernicus taught that really the Earth revolves once a day, and the daily rotation of the sun and the stars is only apparent. Galileo and Newton endorsed this view, and many things were thought to prove it. For example, the flattening of the Earth at the poles, very interesting, huh? And the fact that bodies are heavier than that at the equator. But in the modern theory, the question between Copernicus and his predecessors is merely one of convenience. All motion is relative, and there is no difference between the two statements. The Earth rotates once a day, and the heavens revolve about the Earth once a day. The two mean exactly the same thing, just as it means the same thing if I say that a certain length is 6 feet or 2 yards. Astronomy is easier if we take the sun as fixed than if we take the Earth, just as accounts are easier in decimal coinage. But to say more for Copernicus is to assume absolute motion, which is a fiction. All motion is relative, allegedly, and it is a mere convention to take one body as at rest. All such conventions are equally legitimate, though not all are equally convenient. So convenient philosophically, and it is simpler mathematically at the beginning, but it actually ends up getting more complicated mathematically. So they're just pointing out to you that there is fundamentally no difference. And I know it gets reiterative, but I feel that we are in a time and day that it needs to be pretty much beaten in people's head. I tell my classes that had Galileo confronted the church in Einstein's day, he would have lost the argument for better reasons. You may use my name if you wish, mathematician Carl Wolfman. So basically, we're taught that, science won against the church and they found out that the earth spins and revolves. But here is a professor telling you that actually, no, he would have lost for better reasons today. Sorry, some psychopath is honking.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So it's very important to acknowledge that the Copernican theory offers a very exact calculation of the apparent movements of the planets, even though it must be conceded that from the modern standpoint, practically identical results could be obtained by means of a somewhat revised Ptolemaic system. It makes no sense, accordingly, to speak of a difference in truth between Copernicus and Ptolemy. Both conceptions are equally permissible descriptions. What has been considered as the greatest discovery of Occidental wisdom, as opposed to that of antiquity, is questioned as to its truth value. Physicist Hans Reichenbach. Okay, again, pretty point blank there. Just they're interchangeable. It's a philosophical coordinate system preference. The Earth-centered system is in reality absolutely identical with the system of Copernicus, and all computation of the places of the planets are the same for the two systems. Astronomer J.L. Dreyer, and this is interesting because if you Google it, how do we know the Earth's not geocentric? One of the things they'll say is the retrograde motion of the planets. But of course, the neotychonic system effortlessly explains the retrograde motion of the planets. Also, think about how stupid it is to say that some movement in the sky debunks that the Earth isn't moving. It's ridiculous. So anyway, there it is. I encourage people to maybe screenshot these if they have debates with people, because they're going to just say what Google says, and it's going to be some science mainstream article, and just show them what the actual quote unquote experts say. Okay, so the ancient argument over whether the earth rotates or the heavens revolve around it, as Aristotle taught, it seemed to be no more than an argument over the simplest choice of frame of reference. Obviously, the most convenient choice is the universe. Nothing except inconvenience prevents us from choosing the earth as a fixed frame of reference. If we choose to make the earth our fixed frame of reference, we do not even do violence to everyday speech. We say that the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening. The Big Dipper revolves around the North Star. Which point of view is correct? Do the heavens revolve or does the earth rotate? The question is meaningless. And of course, he means meaningless in the sense that they are identical on paper, and it's just a switching of coordinate systems. Of course, it isn't a very meaningless question now, is it? That's a physicist, Martin Gardner, very infamous physicist. And of course, it isn't insignificant because in one situation, you can pretend that somehow everything came from nothing. It's insignificant, random happenstance and chance. And in the other situation, you have no choice but to acknowledge that that unique position the earth rests in must have been placed there. Here is Stephen Hawking again to the question whether or not the motion of the earth in space can be made perceptible in terrestrial experiments. We have already remarked that all attempts of this nature led to a negative result. Before the theory of relativity was put forward, it was difficult to become reconciled to this negative result. This is Relativity, the Special and General Theory, cited in Stephen Hawking's A Stubbornly Persistent Illusion, page 169. This is Stephen Hawking in 2007 citing Einstein's quote. Okay, so when you hear Glover's bring up the pendulum from 1851, or the mechanical gyro from 1909, or the ring laser gyro from 1963, they have no idea what they're talking about. Okay, this is their hero who had to save their model like 30 times with theories saying you can't prove that the earth is in motion with any type of experiment, and he's citing Einstein to do it. This is a very damning quote because it invokes both Einstein and Hawking. So I think it's good for people to save that one.
Absolutely. Right. Well said.
Yeah. So if it, being the earth, isn't moving relative to the ether, then earth alone among the cosmos is at rest relative to the ether. Now that may be an absurd possibility, but maybe it's true. I think you can see that this is not going to be very philosophically satisfying. And it isn't satisfying physically either, but it violates the Copernican principle that the earth isn't special. It is particularly absurd in light of what we know from modern cosmology, namely that there are places in the universe, distant galaxies in particular, that are moving away from us at speeds very close to the speed of light. Another assumption. It's absurd to imagine that everything in the universe is pinned to Earth when there are such a wide range of speeds relative to Earth throughout the universe, but it suffices to rule it out on this philosophical ground. So again, just point blank, physicist Richard Wolfson telling you point blank, it's philosophy. It's philosophy. A belief system built on the doctrine of men, void of empirical evidence, with
Whoa, you're cutting out, Austin. Don't know what happened there. Uh-oh. Better have Kai go to adjust the antenna or something. Oh, boy. Ah! What has happened? Well, he's muted now.
Yeah, just give me a sec. Sorry, I'm trying to figure it out.
Oh, okay. Oh, that sounded okay. Yeah, maybe it's a background. Yeah, it could be a background process running while he's figuring that out. But again, these are astronomers, astrophysicists, scientists, physicists from 100 years ago all the way up to today, military organizations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of them are saying, well, we just can't accept the evidence because it goes against their philosophy. And yeah, I said I'm having a hard time accepting the evidence because and the reason for that is because there is so much overwhelming evidence that the Earth is flat, right? The biggest thing that we can see way too far is a huge item. So I'm thinking these two don't jive, right? So that's why I said, if you put this out there, of course it didn't look good at first, but at that point in time, I also did not know about Michselson-Gale. So if Michselson-Gale detected the exact same thing that we did, and they did, then why didn't the ballers point to a mainstream science team of Albert Michelson and Gale and point to that experiment and say, yeah, see, there's your Earth motion. Well, they were smart in not doing that because then they knew that they would have to come up with an excuse to prove Michselson-Morely, right? Or to disprove Michselson-Morely. And they couldn't do that. So what was their answer? Well, then they just mathematically eliminated the ether completely. Something that even Einstein and every other physicist, since the beginning of science essentially, has said must exist, does exist, and we know it's there. We have technology based on it. It is so absurd. Those of you that think you're claiming that it doesn't exist, and there's nothing but evidence for hundreds of years for it. So it's like, pull your head out, ballers. They told you this, and they have no proof whatsoever. We have tons of proof right here in modern day, and not the least of which, was my gyro experiment, or our gyro experiment. Actually, I should say Rick's gyro experiment, but I did them too. But yeah, it's just patently insane that you guys, you will grab onto anything. And of course, when your myth doesn't fit you anymore, like the geometric horizon, then you discard it and say it was never there. Well, if it's never there, then how can you claim that Earth curvature blocks anything? You can't. It's crazy
just how much they swept under the rug. Like,
it is beyond belief.
And then they're like, "Oh yeah, you guys don't have any evidence." And all of a sudden, well, what's this over here? Oh, well, look, just lift up the rug. There it is. Oh, don't look at that stuff.
Oh, flat seven. That is not the only ether experiment. There are tons of ether experiments. They go on today, and in fact, quantum physics has renamed it. What the hell do they call it? Their word for the ether.
The Higgs field.
The
Higgs field, right. Yeah, they call it the Higgs field. But I mean, not only does it exist in that context, I mean, they talk about the ether in the physical for the life forces as being your prana, right? Or your aura or whatever, anything like that. There are many manifestations of it, but the idea is that everything, they want us to believe that everything just came out of nothing and suddenly it was all there. We're saying that this had to be intelligently engineered, and in doing so, there must be a logical train of thought into how it was done, and that is what we're pursuing.
And despite all of the many quotes that we've got here, you just know there's going to be some troll out there who's going to point fingers and say, "Oh, you guys are cherry picking."
Yeah, we're cherry picking the entire scientific body.
Unless you quote the entire book, You're cherry picking. That's what they're gonna say. So,
Yeah, it's crazy. So, how you doing, Austin? You getting a better position?
I don't know. Do I sound all right?
You sound fine.
Okay, I mean, I can try it. I don't know what's going on with the Wi-Fi. It's going in and out.
Okay.
Yeah, I can just try. So, thus we may return to Ptolemy's point of view of a motionless Earth. This would mean that we use a system of reference rigidly fixed to the Earth in which all stars are performing a rotational motion with the same angular velocity around the Earth's axis. One has to show that the transform metric can be regarded as produced according to Einstein's field equations by distant rotating masses, which we don't actually have to do that, of course. This has been done by Thuring. He calculated a field due to a rotating, hollow, thick-walled sphere and proved that inside the cavity it behaved as though there were centrifugal and other inertial forces usually attributed to absolute space. Thus, from Einstein's point of view, Ptolemy and Copernicus are equally right. What point of view is chosen is a matter of expediency. And I would like to point out that that is pretty significant because when you talk about the Foucault's pendulum or anything like that, if you have a system that has movement, whatever's inside of that hollow system will also be affected by the external motion. And I think that that's pretty significant. Foucault's pendulum's inconsistent, doesn't work past the equator, it seems. There's no real evidence of it and stuff like that. No real evidence of it on the equator not doing anything. But there is potentially something going on, and it could be, of course, an ether drift within an external motion around it. I actually have a letter from Einstein saying that very thing, which I'm currently getting translated to make it perfectly accurate. So anyway, that's pretty interesting. Here is infamous science writer Kitty Ferguson. It is possible to describe the entire universe using any chosen point as the unmoving center. The Earth will do very well, and no one can prove that choice is wrong. Scientists today prefer to picture everything in motion and nothing as being the center. If you haven't given much thought to the implications of 20th century science, you may be chagrined to realize that because of the concept of relative motion, no one can prove that the Earth moves. Kitty Ferguson, science writer. Here's I guess just let me know if I start going in now.
No, you're fine.
Okay, so we can take either the Earth or the Sun, or any other point for that matter, as the center of the solar system. This is certainly so for the purely kinematical problem of describing the planetary motions. It is also possible to take any point as the center, even in dynamics. Although recognition of this freedom of choice had to await the present century, astronomer Fred Hoyle again coined the term Big Bang. Ironically, actually, we don't have that freedom in the 21st century, Fred. You might be surprised to find out. Let it be understood at the outset that it makes no difference from the point of view of describing planetary motion, that includes retrograde glovers, whether we take the Earth or the Sun as the center of the solar system. Since the issue is one of relative motion only, there are infinitely many exactly equivalent descriptions referred to different centers. Infinitely many. In principle, any point will do, the moon, Jupiter. So the passions loosed on the world by the publication of Copernicus' book De Revolutionibus Orbum Celestium were logically irrelevant.
Wow.
We're still good?
Yeah, still good.
Crazy quote.
Doing great.
Wow, I'm just blown away.
Yeah, these are crazy.
I said we have all the evidence, and we do. Baller's got nothing. Nothing. So continue on.
Okay. If we were to adopt a frame of reference like Tycho's in which the Earth is at rest, then the distant galaxies would seem to be executing circular turns once a year. And in general relativity, this enormous motion would create forces akin to gravitation, which would act on planets and give them the motions of the Tychonic theory. Physicist Steven Weinberg. Oh man, there's no way the galaxies just turn once a year, though. That would make the sky like an intricate, beautiful clock that all works together. We can't have that. Oh man.
Nope. Heaven forbid.
Yeah, like what's more hyperlogical as apply Occam's razor? The stars move every year and the galaxies do a turn every year, and what they call galaxies. Oh man, that's crazy. All right, so which is real, the Ptolemaic or Copernican system? Although it is not common for people to say that Copernicus proved Ptolemy wrong, that is not true. One can use either picture as a model of the universe, for our observations of the heavens can be explained by assuming either the Earth or the Sun to be at rest. Physicist Stephen Hawking. Pretty point blank there.
Yeah, it doesn't get much plainer than that. And Austin,
this is a hero.
If you want to like cut the presentation in half, because I think you said you had like over 100, and then come back and do kind of a joint presentation with Jaron next week, that would be fine, because we do have other stuff that, like the James Webb. Everybody's asking about the James Webb telescope. which of course there's tons of information on that. So I leave it up to you. It's your choice, but I just thought I'd give you the option.
Yeah, let's do that for sure. I'll just read a couple more, and then we'll just continue it next week or something.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, cool. So the Michselson-Morely experiment confronted scientists with an embarrassing alternative. On the one hand, they could scrap the ether theory, which had explained so many things about electricity, magnetism, and light, or if they insisted on retaining the ether, they had to abandon the still more venerable Copernican theory that the Earth is in motion. To many physicists, it seemed almost easier to believe that the Earth stood still than that waves, light waves and electromagnetic waves, could exist without a medium to sustain them. It was a serious dilemma, and one that split scientific thought for a quarter century. Many new hypotheses were advanced and rejected. The experiment was tried again by Morley and by others with the same conclusion. The apparent velocity of the Earth through the ether was zero. Historian Lincoln Barnett, I think that's a good one to stop on, actually, because it summarizes everything, which is that they actually went as far as to throw the entire field of electrical field theory out the window and say that nothing could sustain waves, as opposed to getting rid of the Copernican model, which is the idea that we are insignificant. And so it's a philosophy, an anti-creationist philosophy, and it's a religion.
Yep.
I wouldn't even give it the I don't know what the word I'm thinking of is, but I wouldn't even call it a philosophy. That's lunacy. That's just taking your common sense and your senses and all, everything, and just throwing it out the window.
Yeah, I agree.
I wouldn't consider that philosophy.
Which is why they always go by that, and that's their big thing to get across, is that the universe doesn't have any responsibility to make any sense to you.
Oh, it's just lunacy. That was awesome, Austin. I mean, great research, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah, big shout out to Jaron. A lot of these came from his video.
I was going to say it was kind of Jaron-esque.
Yeah. Hey, Austin, I'd love it if you could shoot me a copy of the PowerPoint presentation.
I think it should be in the chat.
Oh, in our internal chat?
Yep.
Awesome.
Cool. I'll be sure to add it to my curriculum there.
Yeah, because yep, it is. Excellent. Okay. And is it okay if I make that available to General? Or
yeah,
would you...
yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. Beautiful. Wow. So, and we're not even quite halfway yet, are we? and like I said, we could go on for days like this, ballers. I mean, we keep saying it, and to hear you come back and say you have absolutely nothing and we have all the evidence is the biggest ultimate oxymoronic statement you could ever make, when nothing could be further from the truth. We have all the evidence, all of it. So yeah, so cool. Okay, so we're gonna call that it for that. Let's go.